Welcome to episode 9 of Kokoon. And this episode, we're so lucky to have Dr. Carl D Marci, who is an author, physician, scientist, and entrepreneur, joining us to discuss our topic for this series, all about AI in medicine, health, and wellness. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So I want to kick off with the first question to start from the beginning. So how did your career journey begin? What led you to this point?
Yeah, so I went to medical school and fell in love with the brain. And when you do that, you've got three choices. You could be a neurosurgeon, a neurologist, or a psychiatrist. And neurosurgeons don't really talk to people. I like to talk to people, so got rid of that one. Neurologists only treat things they can see in the brain. I was pretty sure there are things going on in the brain we couldn't see. So I left psychiatry, which is this amazing uh, enormous field. And what I liked about it in particular were there were different paths you could sort of take. And I started off as an academic. I was researching the neurobiology of empathy. So how does one brain understand another brain, which turns out to be a complicated problem. But the idea was, could you take two people interacting, and psychotherapy as a clinical interaction was really nice because typically the therapist is trying to understand the patient, so it's one way. And I was using neuroimaging tools and physiologic tools and video cameras and trying to recruit patients and clinicians to let me videotape their sessions and measure their non-conscious responses as they were doing therapy for mood and anxiety disorders. And someone suggested I go over to the MIT Media Lab, and that was really a breakthrough moment. Do you want to hear about it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this is early knots, and there was a group there building the first generation of what we now call wearables. So they were taking handheld computers, doing what MIT engineers do, taking them apart and inserting various sensors, a Bluetooth sensor, a heart rate monitor, a voice recorder, and literally sewing it into a vest and walking around. And I was like, oh my goodness, you have a multi-sensing wearable platform. And they said, yeah, it's exciting, but we don't know what to do with it. And I said, well, I have some ideas. And that led to a course that went on for over a decade. And it attracted a lot of business students from MIT Sloan School. And the final exam was to write a business plan on one of the cool technologies. It was a survey course of all the technologies happening in the Media Lab, which were, very interesting. And the students would then ask me if I want to start a company with them. So I started two companies out of the MIT Media Lab. One is a company called Cogito Health, which was recently purchased, and then Interscope Research, which we can talk more about if you like.
Sure. Yeah, tell me more.
Well, so Interscope was one of the pioneers in consumer neuroscience. So we were using sophisticated tools like eye tracking and physiologic monitoring and EEG to measure emotional and non-conscious responses to media and advertising messages, and having a lot of fun and building a business. That was in 2006. In
Wow.
2007, the iPhone came out. In 2011, the iPad came out, and in 2011, we were being asked by the media companies, not Facebook or Google or Apple, but by NBC Universal, Time Warner, Fox Television, to understand this new technology, because the executives there had were concerned, appropriately, it turns out, about their advertising revenue. Because if you think about it, if you're sitting at home and you're on your phone while you're watching television, you're probably going to miss the advertising. And this is before all
100%.
the streaming and everything took over and blew up the ad model anyway. But that was the beginning of some important insights.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So you're really at the forefront of all of that.
Yeah, yeah, and part of what we started to see, or I started to see, because as a psychiatrist, I obviously was trained in looking for addiction, is symptoms that to me started to look like people were getting addicted to this new technology, and there's obviously a fine line between habits and addiction. We've all changed our habits around technology, but that doesn't mean we're all addicted to it. But we started to see interesting things happen in some of our studies that made me very concerned, and that led me on a journey to write a book.
Yeah, well, tell us about that book, because it is really a revolutionary. And I mean, I've interviewed you before for my social media book, where and the chapter I included that in was all about for social media managers and the impacts and risks associated with their job in terms of addiction. Tell me more about the book and what's in it and some of the advice that you give to people in that book. And I'll just bring
Yeah.
it up so people can see it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, so the transformational moment was around 2011. I was in New York City. We were doing a study. Young women, ages 18 to 21, who were heavy users of social media, were recruited to our media lab, and they were randomized into one of two groups. Group one, bring your phone, watch TV like you would at home with your phone, and we're going to monitor, some of your responses. Group two, we're going to leave your phone outside the room, come in and sit down. Same thing. We're going to monitor your response. It was about 45 minutes of watching TV, and everyone was getting paid $150. And I noticed the first young woman who sits down in the room where they did not have their phone started to fidget a little bit. And then she started to move around a lot, and she did not look well. And I was like, wow, is she having a panic attack? Is something going on? She gets up, walks out, grabs her phone and leaves. Next one comes in, 5 minutes, gets up, walks out, grabs her phone and leaves. Next one. We lost a third of the young women in that group. 100% of the young women who were able to keep their phone finished the study. And I went out and I asked, the people who were the staff, I was like, did you see any strange behaviors in the group? Nope, not until we took their phone away. And what we didn't realize, Karen, is we were doing what we now call a deprivation study. We're depriving people of their precious technology. And all I could think of watching these young women was B.F. Skinner. Do you remember B.F. Skinner and the rats in the box? And he would give them two choices. There was sugar water or water with cocaine in it. And the rats would pretty quickly figure out they take the cocaine, and then he would take the cocaine away, and they would go into withdrawal, and they would sort of bounce around. I was like, this looks like Skinner rats withdrawing from something. It must be their phone. And that's when I started to do research for the book you have up on the screen. And it took about 7 years to do the research and write the book, which came out in 2022.
Yes, and I mean, I used to run a course at the University of the Sunshine Coast about, it was called Issues in Social Media, and for part of that, we would have students put their phones in their bags while I was teaching, which they should anyway. And I saw similar twitchy behaviour of just people just sort of almost just automatically reaching for the phone that isn't there. Quite interesting just to see how attached people have become.
Well, and I think attached is the right word. It's really just a technology that has become part of the fabric of our lives. We're all, including me, right, highly dependent on it. And I think that requires us to think a little bit about how we're using technology in our lives, how our children are using technology. And in the book, I talk about sort of a digital literacy. We need to kind of train people to think about this incredibly powerful technology. I mean, look, the average smartphone has far more computational power than the computers that put humans on the moon in 1969. We do not let children drive a car until they're 16. They have to pass a cognitive test. They have to pass an eye exam. They have to pass a behavioral test. And even then, in most states, they have a chaperone for 6 or 12 months. Why on earth would we give them a supercomputer in their pocket connected to the entire internet and all the apps without some training? I mean, it's a terrible idea.
And I'm not sure if you've seen in Australia, we're about to bring in a ban for people under 15 from using social media. That comes into play on December 11. And a lot of the platforms are now grappling as to how they're going to manage that to make sure that they adhere to the law here in Australia. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I did see that, and I was very impressed with you Australians. You know, I think candidly, you hit on it a little bit at the end there. How do you enforce it, right? Because
Mm,
kids are smart; they're gonna do workarounds. One of the things that I'm tracking in the US state by state. States are starting to adopt laws where schools, public schools, require students to put their phones in some kind of locker at the beginning of the day, and they can't touch it till the end of the day. I'm a huge fan of that because
mm,
it's so disruptive to learning. I'll give you
yeah.
one example. One of the studies I quote in the book and I talk about a lot, where they took college age kids and they gave them a difficult math test in three different conditions. One condition, leave the phone off and outside the room. The second condition, leave the phone off and under your chair. The third condition, leave the phone off but on the table. Now, in all three conditions, the phone is off. But the results were a step function. The closer that phone was to that person, the worse they did on that test. And
Wow.
yeah, and this is what some people call continuous partial attention, right?
Yes.
Just merely having the technology in our view actually alters the way we think and process information, and it to the point where it impacts our studies. And social media is particularly insidious. When you look at outcome studies on students of just about every age, and just their test scores and their grades. Um, Students who do their homework and have social media on or near them, they just do worse. And
Mm,
it's not surprising because it's so distracting.
absolutely. And before we went to air, we started talking about AI. Now, in your book, you talk about having that sort of digital literacy, the literacy around the use of it. Do you think that we need to extend that now to the use of AI and from people and particularly younger people over relying on it?
Yeah, I think in the final chapter of the book, I talk a little bit about we need to get our heads on straight around this technology now because more is coming. And one of the examples was artificial intelligence, and boy has it come.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
come very quickly. I mean, what another transformative moment, right? When ChatGPT was released. Yeah, I think that artificial intelligence takes all of the concerns that I articulated in the book, which really tries to look at a from a neurodevelopmental perspective. And what I mean by that is we now know a lot about the human brain. And one of the unique things I always remind people about the human brain is it's unique among mammals in that at birth it's only 10% developed. That means
Mm,
90% of brain development occurs outside the womb. And we kind of have a socially intuitive sense of this, right? You can't, we don't let our kids go off independently until they're at least 18 years old in most countries, right? That's a long time, right? So we have these powerful networks of neurons in our brain that allow us to connect and empathize and form attachments, your word from earlier, to each
yes.
other. Well, guess what? We don't really turn those networks off and that attachment off. So we can also get attached to technologies. And one of the studies I cite in the book, I think is very relevant to artificial intelligence. And that study took a series of images. They were pictures of faces, and they took all of them, and they had the sort of clear version, the original version, and then digitized it in a gradient stepwise fashion to the point where you could not even recognize that it was a human face, and all points in between. And then they
Mm,
took two groups of people. One group of were healthy, normal adults. The other group followed a scale and described themselves as quite lonely. So you have
mm,
lonely people and
yeah.
not so lonely people, age match, and they're all looking at these images. And it was a very simple task. Just rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how human the image looks. Well, guess what they found? Lonely people were more likely to rate digitized images as human than people who are
Wow.
non-lonely. So we
Oh,
actually, and there's other data that supports this, that the more lonely we get, the more likely we are to empathize and connect with non-human entities. Now, here
yeah.
comes AI. into a world where loneliness is off the charts, right? More and more people are lonely. Fewer people are getting married. Fewer people are having children. Fewer people are going to church and institutions that used to have community things. They're staying home with their phones. And now this AI agent pops up. And of course, people are going to form attachments to it. And that already is having consequences. There are case reports now, many of them, of people becoming very depressed. Well, in some cases, committing suicide because of what the AI said. There's homicide cases where the AI made this one guy paranoid about his mother, and he shot her. I mean, just
Oh my
horrible,
God.
horrible
Yeah.
things. Yeah. So we got to up our game here, or things are going to go badly very quickly.
Absolutely. So many of the AI platforms, say OpenAI, for example, some of their spokespeople have come out to say that they had no idea that AI would ever be used in that way. How do you think? How do you feel about that? Do you think they should have been known, or sort of preempted this, or be completely oblivious to the idea?
Well, yeah, I always take what for-profit oriented companies executives say with a pinch of salt, right? Because they're very highly incentivized to say certain things. And look, Facebook is another good example where um, you know they actively are marketing to young people, and they're not alone. All of them do it. I mean, the other day, my younger son is 9 years old, and I happened to log into his email just to sort of see what's going on. And I was stunned. He didn't have a single email from a single human, but he had hundreds of emails from every technology he's ever touched, whether it was Discord or Instagram or Snapchat. And I mean, Karen, pages after pages after pages. He is
Wow.
actively being recruited, and I'm just like, wow, is right. So these guys know what they're doing. They know
Yeah.
exactly what they're trying to do. And the challenge with all these technologies is that the business model requires engagement, sustained engagement. The more you use that product, the more money they make. Full stop. So of
Yes.
course it's going to be designed to get you highly engaged. I talk about this in the book where the same neuroscience and brain science that we were using in Interscope to try to understand people's emotional responses to media and advertising, these companies are using to get you hooked on it. It's a little like the cop with the radar and the guy driving with the radar, the radar detector, right? It's a bit of sadly, it's a cat and mouse game. But
Mm,
these technology companies have, now billions, sometimes trillions of dollars behind them. How can the average consumer compete?
absolutely. Absolutely. And look, I want to shift gears now, because
Sure.
while the AI is, it absolutely has its darker side. I know I follow you on LinkedIn, and I see all the amazing things that you're doing on LinkedIn, and you're using AI a lot in your work now, aren't
Yeah.
you? Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So again, I try to practice what I preach, right? So in the book, in the end, I talk about these are technologies, right? And so it's the proverbial knife, right? The knife in the hands of a surgeon is designed and used for healing, and the knife in the hands of a murderer is a device for killing, right? So it's about intent.
Yeah.
So there's lots of ways that technology can be amazing and helpful, even social media, which we can talk about. So from an AI perspective, we're doing a lot of things, and I will tell you, my 25-year career as a physician, I've never seen any technology adapted so quickly. And so it's very exciting. We have to be careful. But if you think about um, what every physician does, is they document now electronically in almost every case the patient's history, how they're doing, some sort of examination, laboratory data, medical decision making, and plan. It's all language, and these tools are very good at analyzing and summarizing and doing language. And it's overwhelming for physicians to manage all that information. So these are great tools that can make clinicians more efficient, which we all need. So we shouldn't be surprised that they're being adopted. Do you want me to give you some examples?
Sure. Yeah, that would be great.
So just a few here. One that I think a lot of clinicians are using that seems kind of intuitive is what's called ambient listening. So these are devices that take the conversation, whether it's virtual like this or in face to face, and then it transcribes it. So it's voice to text. So the computer records the voice, then translates it into text, and then organizes it. This is where the large language models come in, into a clinical note that the clinician then can read and edit, and they should, and then sign. And then the other thing it can do is start to suggest billing codes and diagnostic codes so that it makes your life a little bit easier. And we're finding that is dramatically reducing the time to charting. So it makes it much more efficient and faster for clinicians to chart things. Other things we're doing is we're creating agents that can summarize a patient history, right? So some of my patients I've been seeing for 15 plus years. It's hard for me to remember everything. So to be able to push a button and get a 2-paragraph summary of the last 10 years, and oh, by the way, all the other clinicians they've seen in my hospital system is very powerful. So patient summaries is another one. Another one that I particularly like is using sort of chatbot and agenic artificial intelligence to conversationally interact with patients between visits. But what they're actually doing, in addition to keeping patients engaged, is they're collecting information. So you're probably familiar with rating scales, like in depression, the patient health questionnaire, 9 items, the PHQ-9, right? It's 9 questions, fully validated. It's a very nice scale for measuring how depressed someone is and tracking their outcomes. Well, the bot actually asks those 9 questions, but does it in a way that's conversationally, so you don't feel like you're filling out a form all the time, which is sometimes hard to get patients to do that. And then we can use that to generate a depression score and use that to do measurement informed care. And then the final example I'll give you is taking a massive amount of what's called real world data. So we have over 100 million patient records in the cloud. Yeah, and then training a specific proprietary large language model, predictive model on that data set. So it's not in the wild looking at stuff. And by the way, it's all de-identified and very secure. And then we can use that to predict any outcome for you, Karen, over the next 6 months or 6 years and any point in between. So you can go in, you can upload your patient records and then ask it, what is my risk of having a heart attack in the next 6 months, 18 months, 24 months? What is my risk of having skin cancer? What is my risk of developing diabetes, dementia? Any outcome you can imagine. We're seeing some incredible results with that tool.
That's fantastic. And
Yeah.
again, I mean, just I guess doing things that we can't do as humans, which is really, really positive. And it'll be great to see over the next few years just the impact of using AI in that way, as you said, for healing, rather than the darker side. And I want to talk as well. I always ask my guests on this podcast about their own sort of wellness, and you are very busy. You were doing so many things. How do you maintain balance and keep your energy up to be able to do everything?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like a lot of people, as I was coming in age, the thing I sacrificed was sleep. And we now know that sleep is really, really, really important. So what probably the biggest shift in the last few years for me is making sure that I get 7-8 hours of sleep every night. And we know that what's likely happening is that's when we're sort of cleaning our brain of the junk from the day before. And that's why there's a correlation between poor sleep and Alzheimer's, for example. The plaques and tangles that lead to dementia are cleared often when we're asleep. And so getting good sleep is really important. So sleep is one. The other thing is, and it's simple but not easy, is to maintain exercise and diet, right? So from an exercise perspective, and we now have so much data and we know what to do. So I try to keep a balance between cardio, intermittent high intensity workouts, and weight training. And then I sprinkle in some yoga every now and then, particularly when I travel. I'm tall. You can't see how tall I am on the video, but I'm 6'2", and so sitting on a plane, I get kind of stiff.
Yeah.
So I kind of do
Yeah.
yoga in between there, and diet honestly is is always a challenge. We all need more fruits and vegetables in our diet, but there's a lot of great options out there, and trying to be careful and disciplined about that, and all that starts to add up over time. And then I guess finally, we can't forget managing stress.
Yeah.
So meditation and social interaction are two ways to do that.
Absolutely, and I need more of the sleep for sure. I'll put that on
Well,
my
yeah, you were
my
telling me
to-do list for
you
next
got up
week.
pretty early this morning, halfway around the world, didn't you?
Yes, that's what happens when you live in Australia, but that's okay. And I wanted to ask you as well, because you've written a whole book on really how to manage social media and how to interact with it in a healthy way. How do
Yeah.
you do that? Because I see you on LinkedIn, and I see you on there a lot. Do you have your own sort of boundaries about how you navigate the use of social media in your own life?
Well, you see me on LinkedIn, but you don't see me on Facebook. You don't see me on Instagram. You don't see me on Twitter, and that's
No.
one of the ways I've done it. I've chosen one platform that I think is also very what I liked about LinkedIn, because it is a very professional environment. It's consistent with my offline identity, right? So in the book, I talk about 10 recommendations for protecting your brain in the digital age, and one of them is to be very careful about your online identity versus your offline identity. Thank you. And what I mean by that is there's clear data, I cite this in the book, that there's a correlation between the number of social media platforms you're on. Forget about what you're doing on, just how many you're on, and depression. Right. And in the book, I use the example of Shakespeare's quote, "All the world's a stage and we are merely, actors and actresses in it." And what I think Shakespeare was getting at is that we're all sort of performing at some level when we're out in the world. But what Shakespeare didn't anticipate is every single social media platform is a different stage, right? And so if you're on 3 or 4 or 5 different stages, you got to be really careful you're not presenting 3 or 4 or 5 different versions of yourself, because that can
Mm.
become very confusing when you're offline. So that's number one. Try to just sort of pick a channel and stick with it. Number two, really be intentional about how you're using it, right? So if you look in LinkedIn, I try to only post things that are informational and that might be valuable to people who follow me, right? You're not really interested in my political views at this point. You're certainly not interested in whether I like cats and dogs and things like that, right? So I try to keep it very professional, so that's number two. Number three, now when you get into the more other social media things like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, which are all very different, by the way. But what I do like about um, the sort of Facebooks of the world is that you are sharing information with a network of people who in theory you care about and know, but maybe can't see that often, right? So if you're sharing bits of your life with the purposes of updating folks who you don't see as often, that's perfectly reasonable. Now if you're going on there doing social comparisons, or because you're depressed or to regulate your mood, that's a concern. Right. And that's where
Yes.
people get in trouble. And part of the reason TikTok is so insidious is that it really doesn't have much of a social component to it. It's really the individual just having their own experience and getting sort of sucked into the algorithms. And that gets to the final point I'll make is the kind of ways in which the time you spend on these things does tend to correlate with bad outcomes. So
Mm.
self-monitoring, setting limits. I mean, I know people who set timers and they can have like the social media turn off after a certain period of time. I mean, I have a friend who turns their phone black and white mode so it's less interesting. I mean, all kinds of tricks, and I love them all, like whatever it takes, right? To sort of self-regulate yourself, because the thing we know for sure, and there's studies on this which I'm happy to talk about, is at the end of life, the single best predictor of happiness is the number and quality of human relationships we have, right? And I will tell you, it's a lot harder to make a connection through social media, and have any way that on a physiologic and neurobiologic basis compare that to sitting across from another human and just having a conversation. The two are night and day,
Yeah.
in terms of how it and what it does to our nervous system. So I, for one, am not surprised when you have a generation that's spending so much time on these devices that they're more anxious and depressed and lonely than ever. Because it's just not how we were wired, and how we evolved.
Absolutely. It's great advice. Now, I'd like to also sort of, as we're coming to the end of our chat, I like to ask about goals. And normally when I interview people, there are sort of two camps, and there's like a spectrum where on one end, people are very, have specific goals and very goal oriented. And the other, they're more like go with the flow, see what unfolds. What sort of person are you? And if you are a goal setter, we're now in November. So have you achieved what you set out to this year? And what are your plans for next year?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess I'm kind of a hybrid. There's a little bit of me that's very specific about goals. The other bit kind of goes with the flow because, as you know, life is uncertain and you have to embrace the uncertainty. Um,
So
and
true.
um, there's one thing to kind of explain what we think we're seeing in the world, but very few people are good at predicting the future. Um, that said, I think goals are important. So one of my goals this year was to do more publications. So I feel pretty good. I've got, I think, 6 publications coming out this
Oh,
year.
well
These are,
done.
yeah, peer-reviewed journal articles that are actually, in every case, either using or validating an AI-based algorithm or machine learning approach, using healthcare data to advance therapies and bring treatments to market faster. So that goal's done well. I think another goal has been to try and advance, the different companies I work with, and knock on wood, they're all making progress. So I feel good about that. And then on the personal level, making sure I, carve out time for family and friends.
Yes. Excellent. And then any plans for next year, 2026?
Well, so my go with the flow goal is, I hope, in my lifetime, in our lifetime, to begin to reverse the trend we're seeing in mental health.
Mm,
As a psychiatrist in 2001, when I finished my training, if you would have told me in 2021 you'd be practicing the same way, I would have said, no way. We're learning about the brain. We have all these new technologies. I still practice pretty much the same way, Karen, that I did back then. But there are some new therapies coming, whether it's the psychedelic medicines we're all reading about, new technologies, devices, integrating digital therapeutics and digital health with pills and medications, making telehealth for telepsychiatry more accessible, more efficient. These are all things I see on the horizon that I'm participating in and hopefully advancing, that give me hope that we can begin to reverse or at least slow down what tragically has been double-digit increases in anxiety, depression, loneliness, PTSD, substance use, and suicide. We
mm.
need to do better, and this is where I think technology can help.
Excellent. And I have one final question for you, and that is if you could go back in time and meet yourself at the beginning of your career and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, I love this question. It would be, you don't know yourself as well as you think you do. And that, we all live in our own bodies and we have our own experience of ourselves, and we feel like we know ourselves pretty well, right? But the reality is we all have blind spots. And we're all on a journey, a journey of growth, whether that's physical, spiritual, emotional, or all of the above. And there's two kinds of people: those who are aware they're on the journey and doing something about it, and those who are not. And I like people who are aware and trying to do something about it. And I think the young version of me was less aware of strengths and weaknesses.
That's a great approach. And do you have any final words of advice before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think what I would recommend to your audience regarding technology in our lives is to remember that it just cuts both ways, right? On the one hand, it's an amazing technology. It makes us more productive and enhances and enriches our life in so many ways. But I've been quoting grandmothers more and more. Everything in moderation, right? Whether it's your social media use or streaming video or even working, take a break. And the one thing we didn't talk about that I spent a lot of time in the book talking about is multitasking and media multitasking in general. Very, very bad for the brain. Study after study after study after study shows that multitasking, doing two things simultaneously, decreases processing speed and increases error rate. Just full stop. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that we can all do a better job.
Great words to finish on. And thank you so much for being on this episode today and sharing your time and your knowledge and wisdom. And thank you. And thank you to everyone who watched. And we'll be back next month with another episode of Kokoon. So thank you so much, Dr. Carl. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.